Hello, look at this wall. Okay, I stand corrected. This is not a wall. It is a tower or a pedestal. You can say that. Although it is hard to come by with the proper word for it, because this thing sits at the core of one of the biggest linguistic mysteries of the ancient world, centered in a region which echoes the last words of the Europeans' oldest tongue, the true sounds of the first inhabitants, the voice of the Cyclopean builders. Yeah, that sounds like an overstatement, but listen to this. Today's wall or tower or pedestal, it's too big for a pulpit, is located high up in the Pyrenees at the border between France and Spain. Although it is neither, because the people here refuse to conform and say they have a different country. They call it Euskadi, but to non-speakers is the Basque country, with the pedestal expressing the enigma of the Euskera, or the strange language spoken in these mountains. This tower or dorrea, or alternatively this oinari, as in pedestal, is called Urkulu. Officially, Urkulu is said to be Roman because, well, that's one of those things academics repeat without really thinking. For them, Urkulu is just like the Alpium trophy built by the Romans in the Alps. However, any person with a barely seeing eye notices there is no resemblance between the two. Not even the mountains are the same. Worse, the main reason to call ancient ruins Roman is because the Romans introduced writing into most of Europe. Thus, the oldest text on stuff is usually in Latin. However, Romans said nothing about Urculo, not a single line. They were speechless. This unusual Roman silence drove some folks to another go to big mouth in dating, Napoleon. Just like with the Romans, a lot of stuff was happening during the short period the short tempered Corsican was around. So, in Europe, whenever something strange is determined to be not Roman, it is considered a safe bet to call it Napoleonic. And also, Napoleon did wander around here, and just because he said so, had a bunch of bases built. The problem is that Napoleon was trigger happy with his artillery, and the Napoleonic bastions have nothing in common with Urculo. Thus, the claim that Urculo was a cannon holder for the revolutionary French army sounds worse than calling it Roman. Nearby, in the Pyrenees slopes or in the Basque country, there is nothing that matches Urkulu in terms of sophistication and construction style, which is not helpful in trying to understand what that thing is or was. Nonetheless, that uniqueness is mostly because old Cyclopean constructions got lost over time due to people insisting on damaging them to fit their immediate and short sighted goals. Take this one for example. A handful of kilometers north of Urkulu, there is another awkward bastion called Chateau Pignon, likewise sitting atop a mountain overlooking the horizon. The problem is that the Fortaleza Peñón was heavily modified by the King of Aragon in the 16th century, trying to fit some cannons onto the mountain. Yes, yet again the cannons. Moving on. The new structure was swiftly abandoned for being useless. However, the damage was done. Nowadays, we cannot even be sure if the stonework was all done at the same time or in phases. But to my eye, the stones at the base do seem reminiscent of older Cyclopean structures. What is better preserved although not by much, is Zerkupe. This is a very old village dated from the Bronze Age, deep in Cyclopean times, which, despite being modified by medieval shepherds, retain most of the original stone houses. Also preserved in the old ruins were some household trinkets, enabling both the dating to the site and a curious observation. There were no death remains on site, no burials, no bones. On the other hand, Chateau Pignon, the sort of pedestal just mentioned before, is but a few meters away. It is as if the living were settled in Zerkupe and the dead were exposed in Pignon. This separation of the living and death is not uncommon, because dead people stink. Even more if one is engaging in reburial or excarnation, as the people of prehistoric Europe were, exposing the dead bodies to nature to remove the flesh and then go around to play with the bones elsewhere. This was the preferred death ritual in most of Europe until the early Bronze Age, and also the main reason for the building of dolmens, including in the Basque country, boasting some fancy cases complete with cat flaps, the type of stuff we can find all the way to Georgia at the other extreme of the Cyclopean lands. What the Urkulu structure really looks like is Cyclopean, in the sense that it was built using odd shaped stones assembled together without mortar, and also for creating a pedestal, a platform with nothing on top, such as what we can find in the Talayots in the Balearic Islands, that are some very similar conical structures built with similar stonework. The fig tree towers in the south of Spain, which are not round but squared, blocky flat surfaces with nothing on top, apparently appropriate for the same unclear use. Or this other one in the Armenian plateau, that is also built with polygonal masonry and also not clear what it was built for, and for sure it is very old, like Bronze Age old. Driving the point that the Cyclopean builders, as in the people from Portugal to Armenia, who built these strange pedestals using odd-shaped stones, were a culture, or better said, a family of cultures that emerged around 2200 BC and lasted here and there until the Iron Age. Although academics insist on telling us otherwise, swearing that all the Cyclopean structures in Europe are completely unrelated to one another and all developed independently. Naturally, the smart thing to do is to ignore the experts' crazy talk and listen to the real people of old, which is not easy since they are all dead now. Urkulu is said to have been built by Caesar and Napoleon, with these two having something else in common, together with Kaiser William from Germany and Tsar Ivan from Russia or Bulgaria, or the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and even Queen Victoria, Empress of India. They all spoke Indo-European languages. It is an amazing feat how this one family of languages expanded so aggressively as to cover most of the whole world. But it did. Nearly all the languages we speak today, from India to the Americas, have one common root that entered Europe not long ago, around 3 or 4,000 years at most, to silence what the people before were saying, with many old languages now completely lost, except for the Basque. Now, if Urkulu is, as it seems, built by the Cyclopean builders who were in Europe from before the arrival of the Indo-European speakers, then the Basque language should be related to other very old European tongues. And for that, we have to go looking for that very ancient thing, tongue, tongue. The names of rivers are usually the world's ancient word. Because whenever new people would reach into a new land, invariably they would ask the locals for the name of things, as when pointing at the river asking, "What's that?" "That is a river," was the answer, which, being lost in translation, resulted in plenty of rivers being called river, river. Like this, in South America, the name Peru, as in the country with awesome polygonal walls, just means river. Whilst in Europe there are 20 odd rivers named Isar, including the Isar in Bavaria, Isère and Oise, and Iseron in France, Gizera on the Czech Republic, Izera in Poland, Hisar in Belgium, Idza in Romania, Isel in Germany, Ezera and Ezaro in Spain, Essaro in Italy, plus a few others that I won't mispronounce. All these rivers are called river, river, due to Izar being the old European word for river. What is the relation to Urkulu? Note this. In Euskera, the language of the Basque country, river is Ibar, quite similar to the old word Izar. Exactly. Not to shake it like who's the hish, but they do fit. Seneca, the famous orator of Rome, got into trouble with the Indo-European Caesar and, as a punishment, was deported to Corsica, the future land of Napoleon. He hated there, and in his book Lamentations, complained to his mother that the people in the interior of the island were using the same words as the Iberians, and even dressing similarly to the Cantabric, or the Basque as we'd say now. A lamentation that seems extra relevant when we realize both the whiny Seneca and his overbearing mother were Spanish, born in Cordoba, so they should know a thing or two about the old languages of the land. It's also worth noting that those same ancient people that Seneca was lamenting about had built a few centuries before some cool Cyclopean towers up in the mountains, fitted with big, dump like a truck blocks of stone. The Corsican towers are clearly related to the prehistoric culture of the Nuragic in nearby Sardinia, the location of yet another tale, a fairy one. Sardinia is where a bunch of very cool Cyclopean stuff was built over many centuries, leaving the island covered in wondrous, unique constructions, ranging from monumental towers to very old caves, which, in this latter case, are remarkable, not for the construction but for the name. The caves, arguably the oldest things ever built in the islands, are called Domus de Janas, or Houses of the Janas, and this word Janas is a synonym for fairy, a word in use not only in Sardinia but also in Portugal, where there are a few very old structures named Janas, because locally that is also a very old name for fairy. Then yet another land where the word Janas is used is, yes, you guessed it, the Basque country in the Cantabrian mountains, where fairies are called anjanas. Since fairies are really old things residing in very ancient myths and caves, they are completing full circle, together with the Lamentations and River River, with the oldest words in Europe preserved in the Basque language. The Basque language is an isolate, but is not alone in that. There are other isolates, which means a language that does not belong to a larger family of languages. Sounds contradictory, and it is, because no language comes out of nothing, just like no construction style does. Real cultural traces, unlike pottery, require time and large cooperation by many different people. That's exactly what a culture does. Implying an isolate language is never a one off case, but always a lost piece of an odd shaped puzzle, a remnant from a lost family of cultures. In the case of the Basque, the more likely relatives should be the neighboring lost tongues, like the Ibero spoken in the south of Spain and the Sardinian Nuragic or the Taurian in Corsica, as we've seen in the Lamentations, all nearby places with Cyclopean walls. The problem is that none of them survived. What did survive is another language isolate or lost tongue, the Georgian Kartvelian, on the other side of Europe, a region that has some interesting Cyclopean walls, including the best ones, built by the Hattian, who spoke a language related to the present day Georgian. Even more surprising is hearing how both the Basque and the Georgian languages share some quirky characteristics as in being agglutinative, ergative, and SOV. I won't explain what these words mean, but it is sufficient to say they are not present in any Indo-European tongues. Confused yet? For me, it sounds as clear as it could. There is plenty of evidence suggesting Urkulu is one of the many Cyclopean works in Europe, and thus that the Basque language should be related to all the other Cyclopean cultures existing a long time ago in the continent. What makes this apparently simple realization exceptional is that the Basque language is dismissed as not being an old original inhabitant of the continent. This much happens because the Indo European language phenomena is aggressively politicized, abused by all sorts of maniac rulers, such as Stalin or Hitler or Charles V, and plenty others, who each one on its own way bent the facts and used the Indo European catchiness to claim superiority over many other languages and cultures, including those stubborn people with a crazy tower and tongue up in the Pyrenees. On the other hand, this is not to say the Basque today have any special claim or grievance against whatever happened hundreds or thousands of years ago, since no living soul should be held accountable for stuff done by dead people, good or bad, related or not. All that matters is that once in Europe there were a lost people with a unique outlook on life, building awesome cyclopean walls, and amazingly, we can still hear some of what they were saying with the Basque language, the last remnant of the cyclopean builder's tongue. Here's the thing, the Cyclopean builders, at least in Europe, shared an identity, a culture, with many peculiar traces beyond the architectural style. Then the Indo Europeans expanded throughout the continent and erased almost all of what those people meant, including their memory, which is all but lost, except for some odd shaped ruins here and there, and also a few sounds preserved in the mountains of the Basque country by people who speak a bizarre tongue. Interestingly enough, some of the unique characteristics of the Basque, as in the agglutinative, ergative, and SOV, can also be found in the Dravidian language isolate, on the other extreme of the Indo-European language block, in South India, yet another place with polygonal walls, and where we are heading next. That's it for today. Hope you liked it. Drop an eye in the comments.